Hi and welcome to this video about heart structure and function. And so the first thing you need to know is the basic structure of the heart. And so there are four major chambers for the heart. And so you have here at the top two chambers, this one here and also this one here. These are referred to as atria. And then you have the bottom chambers, which are referred to as ventricles. So this is a ventricle here, and also this is a ventricle here. Now, a common source of confusion is when you see heart diagrams labelled, you always see this side being the left-hand side and this side being the right. This is because this is done from the person's whose heart it is, from their perspective. And so this is their left-hand side and this is their right-hand side. And so this would be the right ventricle, the right atria, the left ventricle and the left atria. And you'll also notice here, these are the walls of the different blood vessels, of the different chambers. And so you can see here that the ventricles at the bottom have a much thicker muscular tissue compared with the atria, which is much, much thinner. That's because the atria only have to contract to the ventricles. The ventricles themselves, they have to contract to either the lungs or to the rest of the body. You'll notice as well that the muscular tissue on the left-hand side, or the left ventricle, is much, much thicker than the right. That's because the left ventricle has to pump to the rest of the body and the right ventricle only has to pump to the lungs. There are also blood vessels which attach to each chamber of the heart. The first blood vessel is this one here, which is the vena cava, and this is the one that serves the right atrium. From here, the blood is pumped through to the right ventricle. That's then pumped out through the pulmonary artery, and that's the one that takes it to the lungs for it to pick up oxygen and to remove CO2 from the blood. That then comes back via the pulmonary vein, which is this blood vessel here, which serves the left atria. That then pumps to the left ventricle, which then pumps the blood out via this large blood vessel here, which is the aorta. And so if I now show you a fully labelled one of this, you have a few extra bits I didn't include here. So you have two sections to the vena cava. The superior, this basically comes back from the top half of the body, so from the head, and the inferior comes back from the lower half of the body. And you also have these labelled here, so a bicuspid and a tricuspid valve. Now, depending on what board you do, you might not have seen the terms bicuspid or tricuspid. Now, they are usually referred to on AQA, and I think on Edexcel as well, they're usually referred to as atrioventricular valves, both of them. And the reason for that is they're found between the atria and the ventricles, and hence that name. And they can be sometimes shortened to AV valves. These valves, which you find not only in the pulmonary artery but also in the aorta, this isn't shown in this diagram, those are referred to as the semilunar valves. And like all valves, what they do is they promote the movement of something in one direction. And obviously if it doubles back on itself, those valves will close and therefore will stop the blood flow. Now on this particular diagram you can see that the AV valves are open and the semilunar valves are shut. What this means is that the atria are contracting and pushing the blood into the ventricles because these AV valves are open. And we also have got here the semilunar valves which are closed. So that means that the heart or the ventricles are undergoing diastole. Diastole means for it to be in relaxation. Systole means to be in contraction. So this heart, as we have here at the minute, is under atrial systole or ventricular diastole. So a couple of other details as well. The right side of the heart only deals with deoxygenated blood and it pumps to the lungs. The left side deals with oxygenated blood and pumps to the body. Okay, now if we looked at these two heart pictures here, this shows atrial systole because the atria are contracting and the AV valves are open. The SL valves are shut at this point. This diagram shows ventricular systole. That's because the semilunar valves are open, but the AV valves are shut. Now, again, a constant source of confusion about heart questions is this graph, which shows the different pressures in the heart at different time periods. Now, what you've got are three lines here. This first line shows the atrial pressure line. This line here shows the ventricular pressure, and this one shows the aorta. Obviously, because this is the aorta, this is dealing with the left-hand side of the heart. And so what we have here, at this point, exactly here, you have a higher atrial pressure than you do ventricular pressure. So what that tells us is the atria is contracting and pushing blood into the ventricles. And so this diagram represents what's happening roughly around here, where you've got the higher atrial pressure than the ventricular pressure. When these lines cross over, what happens is the ventricular pressure becomes higher than the atrial pressure, and therefore these valves will shut. So at this point here, the pressure is higher in the ventricles than it is in the atria, and therefore that valve will shut. Now, if we continue going up this line, because the pressure at this point isn't greater than the pressure in the aorta, these valves wouldn't be open yet. And so this diagram is probably represented by anywhere here. That's where the ventricular pressure is greater than the pressure in the blood vessel. So specifically here. So the pressure in the ventricle is higher than it is in the aorta, and hence why the semilunar valves are open. And where these lines cross over is the point at which those lunar valves open up. At this point, if you go further round on the graph, up to point 3, what's happened here is the pressure in the aorta is now greater than the pressure in the ventricle, and so that now slams shut the SL valves at this point. And if we continue going down this graph, you can see here that the ventricular pressure eventually becomes lower than the atrial pressure, and so what's happening at that point is the atrial valves are opening, and therefore the blood is flowing through the atria and into the ventricles. And so at these points, at point 1, that shows the AV valve closing. At point 2, the SL valve opening. At point 3, the SL valve closing. And at this point, I should label this 4, but at this point it shows the AV valve opening. And so you've probably heard that recognisable lub-dub sound of somebody's heart beating. That's the closing of the valves, specifically the atrial ventricular valves and then the semilunar ones.